At the central dungeon assembly point, a group of military officers is engaged in a tense discussion inside a dimly lit tent. The man wearing glasses, Colonel Janelle, known as Colonel Ko for simplicity, is visibly worried. As a battalion commander in the 104th Division, he's concerned that something might go wrong in the Tinkin training dungeon, where his troops are currently stationed. On the other end of the line is Colonel John Com, the commander of the 1st Battalion in the same division. He tries to reassure Colonel Ko, explaining that the training is being held due to concerns from higher-ups about the soldiers' gradually decreasing combat power. Despite this, Colonel Ko remains uneasy, believing that they're pushing the men too far, especially given the harsh conditions of the dungeon. Their conversation is interrupted by the entrance of Colonel Junian, the 2nd Battalion's commander. He strides into the tent, an assault rifle slung over his shoulder, and exchanges salutes with the other officers. Without wasting time, Colonel Junian asks about the division commander's whereabouts. Colonel Com snickers at the question, while Colonel Ko fumbles nervously for an answer. Just as he begins to respond, a loud shout echoes from within the tent, startling everyone. Colonel Junian's eyes widen as he learns that the division commander is currently inside the Tinkin dungeon, observing the training firsthand. Instead of concern, Junian bursts into hearty laughter, commenting on the division commander's troublesome nature. He points out that there's no one in the military who can stop a man like their commander, a statement that does little to ease Colonel Ko's anxiety. The fact that such a powerful and unpredictable figure has chosen to oversee the training personally only heightens the tension in the room. As the officers exchange worried glances, the man with glasses, Colonel Ko, steps forward. He adjusts his frames in a dramatic fashion, creating an air of suspense, just like every glasses-wearing character in a manhwa ever does. With a measured tone, he reveals the division commander's parting words before he left for the dungeon. The commander wanted to see a certain soldier in action with his own eyes. The room falls silent as the weight of the statement sinks in. The officers realize that the division commander's presence isn't just a routine inspection, it's something far more personal and possibly dangerous. They each wonder who this soldier could be and why the commander has taken such a keen interest in him. As we return to the center of the dungeon, we find the commander of the 104th Division, a 2-star general whom we'll call Brutus, calmly waiting for the approaching platoon. The soldiers are taken aback by his imposing presence, and the sight of him sitting nonchalantly in the middle of the dungeon is nothing short of bewildering. The platoon commander, momentarily frozen in shock, forgets to salute, his mind racing as he tries to process why someone of Brutus's stature is here. Kim Minjun, positioned behind the platoon commander, is equally stunned. He had been briefed that their mission involved escorting an injured person, but he certainly wasn't expecting it to be the division commander himself, especially not a man who looks like he belongs in a cartoon rather than a military training exercise. The towering figure of Brutus looms over the platoon commander, who seems to shrink in his presence, his own cartoonish expression of disbelief only adding to the surreal scene. Brutus, with a disarming smile, reveals his supposedly injured side to the platoon commander and casually tells him to take good care of him during the training. The platoon commander, struggling to find his voice, eventually snaps back to reality and salutes his superior, finally standing at attention as he accepts the bizarre mission thrust upon him. The privates scramble to bring out a stretcher, and Kim Minjun, ever the diligent soldier, nervously informs Brutus that they'll carry him for the rest of the mission. However, the sight of the stretcher, a pitifully small contraption compared to Brutus's massive frame, only seems to irritate the general. Without a word, Brutus steps forward, and with a mere squeeze of his hands, crumples the stretcher into a ball, snapping its supports as if they were mere twigs. Dusting off his hands, he turns away from Minjun, clearly uninterested in the idea of being carried. Despite the rejection, Minjun persists, trying to explain that the injured person who is supposed to be on the stretcher needs to follow protocol for the training. But Brutus waves him off, instructing the troops to continue their mission without worrying about him. Minjun, frustrated yet obedient, can only watch as Brutus strides away, leaving him and the others in a state of mild panic. As Minjun stands there, trying to hold back his tears of exasperation, Brutus's gaze falls upon him. The sudden shift in the commander's demeanor is palpable. His previously casual expression is now one of intense interest. It's clear that Brutus didn't just come to the dungeon to oversee the training, he came to observe Kim Minjun specifically. Minjun, noticing the eager look in Brutus's eyes, can't help but grin. He recognizes that something thrilling is about to unfold. The mere thought of what lies ahead fills him with excitement. We transition into a dynamic montage, capturing the intense training that follows the platoon's encounter with the formidable division commander, Brutus. As the platoon marches forward, they're met with waves of monstrous adversaries, from grotesque beasts to cunning predators, all while Brutus observes with keen interest. Throughout these skirmishes, Kim Minjun repeatedly proves himself to be the star of the show. Whether it's racking up the most kills or being the first to react to sudden threats, Minjun is always at the forefront, showcasing his exceptional combat skills. The scene shifts to Minjun effortlessly carrying the massive Brutus on his back, all while navigating deadly traps and dispatching enemies with remarkable ease. This training, grueling for the rest of the platoon, is clearly more of a game to him, an opportunity to test his newfound abilities and enjoy the thrill of battle. However, as time goes on, the toll of the exercise begins to show on the other soldiers. They're visibly exhausted, their energy sapped by the relentless encounters and the burden of their heavy military gear. The breaking point comes during a fierce battle against a horde of slimy, mucus-covered lizard monsters. One of the privates, barely able to lift his sword, manages to slice one of the creatures in half. But as he does, another lizard slithers up from behind, ready to strike. The private, drained and on the verge of collapse, is helpless as the lizard's sticky tongue lashes out toward him. Just as it seems all hope is lost, a flash of steel cuts through the air, severing the lizard's head in a single, precise strike. It's Minjun, wielding a sword enhanced by his recently acquired E-ranked swordsmanship skill. Though the ability isn't particularly remarkable on its own, Minjun can feel the difference it makes, boosting his power and bringing him one step closer to leveling up. Minjun extends a hand to the fallen private, helping him back on his feet while the rest of the platoon struggles to fend off the remaining lizards. The private thanks him, but Minjun is already thinking ahead. He sees the weariness in his comrades, the toll this training has taken on them, and decides it's time for a change. While another soldier battles a lizard nearby, Minjun dashes across the battlefield, slicing down monsters left and right with incredible speed and precision. Within moments, the area is cleared, and Minjun approaches the platoon commander, signaling that the troops need a break. Meanwhile, Brutus, seated comfortably and watching the events unfold, is thoroughly entertained. He had been warned that these hunter-field maneuvers were the toughest yet, but here was Minjun, treating the whole thing like a walk in the park. As Brutus watches, a lizard silently creeps up behind him, thinking it has found an easy target. Without even glancing back, Brutus casually delivers a crushing blow with his fist, obliterating the creature in an instant. At this moment, the platoon commander shouts the order Minjun had been hoping for: a rest period for the troops. Minjun gives the commander a thumbs up, a gesture that doesn't go unnoticed by Brutus. The two-star general, impressed by what he's seen, smiles to himself, recognizing the extraordinary potential of this new corporal. It's clear that Kim Minjun has made a lasting impression on the formidable commander, marking the beginning of a new chapter in his military career. In another part of the dungeon, the scene shifts to an all-female squad engaged in a fierce battle. The atmosphere is tense as the soldiers face off against the same monstrous black orbs that Minjun's team encountered earlier. These rolling creatures, relentless and unforgiving, have pushed the squad to their limits. Exhausted and struggling to keep up, the soldiers are barely holding the line as the orbs charge at them with terrifying speed. One of the monstrous orbs zeroes in on a private, and panic sets in as the soldiers scramble to defend her. But before they can react, a blur of blue streaks through the battlefield, a familiar figure cutting through the chaos. It's son Yuno, the Neo baby, back in action. With incredible precision and speed, she slices the black orb clean in half, the two halves rolling to a stop at her feet. The ground is soon littered with the remnants of defeated monsters, and the battle finally comes to an end, giving the exhausted soldiers a moment to catch their breath. One private, still in awe of Yuno's skills, can't help but express her admiration, her eyes locked on the blue-haired warrior. But as she gushes over Yuno's prowess, another black ball begins to stir behind her, its ominous presence unnoticed. The private is so captivated by Yuno that she doesn't hear the low rumble of the creature until it's almost too late. The black orb screeches, preparing to strike, but just in the nick of time, another soldier shoves her out of the way. The force of the shove sends the private's helmet flying into the air as she stumbles to safety. The private turns to see Yuno at the edge of a cliff, her sword locked in a desperate struggle to hold the monstrous ball at bay. The ball's sheer force pushes Yuno closer to the precipice, her feet slipping as she fights to maintain her balance. The other soldiers, realizing the danger, rush to help, but they're too far away, their efforts futile as they watch Yuno teeter on the edge. The scene cuts away abruptly, leaving Yuno's fate uncertain, her struggle hanging in the balance. As the tension mounts in that part of the dungeon, we return to our boys, who are finally taking a much-needed break. The sun is setting, casting long shadows across the battlefield, and the soldiers are weary but relieved to have a moment to rest. Minjun and the platoon commander are deep in discussion, planning their next move, when the division commander, Brutus, suddenly appears, his presence as imposing as ever. His unexpected arrival startles them both, and the commander's broad grin only adds to the unease. Brutus, with a tone that could be either sincere or mocking, compliments the platoon leader on keeping his soldiers uninjured thus far. The unexpected praise catches the leader off guard, and he can't help but feel a sense of foreboding. Something about the commander's grin, the way his eyes gleam with amusement, suggests that this might be the calm before the storm. The platoon leader, his nerves on edge, begins to suspect that something sinister might be lurking just around the corner. As the platoon commander watches Minjun and his friends practice their combat stances in the distance, a proud smile spreads across his face. The dedication of his soldiers is evident, and he feels a sense of accomplishment. Brutus, the division commander, stands beside him, his presence a mix of encouragement and playful teasing. With a broad grin, he turns to Minjun and gives him a light-hearted pinch, offering a humorous lecture about his balance. The camaraderie between them is palpable, indicating a history of mutual respect and playful banter. Nearby, another corporal, adjusting his glasses, and a private first class with a distinctive fade haircut are deep in conversation. The private, intrigued by the ongoing training, asks the corporal about the hunter field maneuvers. Despite his exhaustion, the corporal enthusiastically explains, adjusting his glasses as he delves into the details. They start discussing a peculiar do not enter sign marking a mysterious hole in the ground. The corporal, embodying the classic glasses-wearing knowledge trope, explains that these dungeon holes are anomalies created when the dungeon's spatial connections are disrupted. Falling into one could transport someone to a random location within the dungeon, a dangerous prospect. Their discussion is cut short by a sudden commotion at the front of the platoon. Minjun and the platoon commander rush to the scene, where they find son Yuno, the blue-haired soldier from the female squad, lying unconscious on the ground. As Yuno regains consciousness and takes a much-needed drink of water, she learns from the platoon commander that her squad is safe and continuing their training. However, Yuno quickly realizes that her ankle is badly sprained, likely from a fall into one of the dungeon holes. Despite her determination to continue fighting, the platoon commander insists that she must rest and informs her that someone from HQ will come to escort her back. Reluctantly, Yuno accepts the situation, knowing that her training session must end here. Brutus, ever the imposing figure, approaches and inquires about Yuno's condition. Her eyes widen in surprise at the sight of the major general in such a dangerous area. After receiving an update from the platoon commander, Brutus contemplates Yuno's story. It dawns on him that her injury might be linked to one of those dungeon anomalies. As he ponders this, a sudden realization hits him, causing him to flinch slightly as if he's made a significant connection or discovery. The division commander, now visibly intrigued, scrutinizes son Yuno with a mix of disbelief and excitement. After confirming her identity as Private First Class Son Yuno, the daughter of Santio from the 4th Company of the 4th Battalion, his reaction is dramatic and full of concern. He slaps an injured tag on Yuno and starts scanning the area frantically. The scene reveals the exhausted state of the platoon, barely able to stand, while Kim Minjun stands out, still fresh and actively coaching his friends on combat techniques. The Major General, with a mix of urgency and irritation, calls out to Minjun, who quickly jogs over to the commander. Yuno, visibly embarrassed, tries to hide her face as Minjun approaches. Her cheeks flush red as she awkwardly avoids eye contact, likely still uncomfortable from their previous awkward encounter. The situation takes a turn when the division commander, his anger barely contained, insists that Minjun carry Yuno so she can continue participating in the training session. Minjun, taken aback by the sudden request, is initially bewildered. However, recognizing the opportunity to earn another achievement and perhaps to ease Yuno's discomfort, he readily accepts. Yuno, despite her reservations and visible discomfort, understands the stakes refusing would mean forfeiting her training and negatively impacting her evaluation score. With a mixture of reluctance and resignation, Yuno closes her eyes, accepting the piggyback ride. Minjun, pleased with the new task, carefully helps her onto his back. His effortless display of stamina and willingness to assist earns him astonished looks from the other soldiers, who are relieved not to be tasked with carrying Yuno themselves. The scene highlights Minjun's growing reputation as a reliable and capable soldier, contrasting sharply with Yuno's shy and reluctant demeanor. As Minjun strides forward, carrying Yuno with ease, it's clear that this act of kindness and strength is another notch in his belt of accomplishments, further cementing his role as a standout in the platoon. With Yuno securely on Minjun's back, he follows the platoon commander, who advises him to let him know if he needs a break. Minjun, however, is determined to push through, driven by the prospect of potential rewards. He grins to himself, seeing Yuno as a valuable opportunity for earning a bonus, while Yuno, still embarrassed by their previous awkward encounter, avoids making eye contact. The division commander, observing the scene with a mix of discontent and curiosity, watches Minjun and Yuno closely. Kim Minji, sensing the tension, approaches the commander and remarks that assisting Yuno might stir up rumors, especially given her connection to another division commander. The general, however, remains steadfast, insisting that helping the injured is entirely within the bounds of their training rules. Despite his outward insistence on following the rules, there's an underlying tension in the general's demeanor. He mutters under his breath about Yuno's father, Santio, and it becomes clear that he harbors some personal resentment or frustration towards him. His dissatisfaction is palpable, adding an extra layer of unease to the situation. Meanwhile, Yuno remains anxious as she takes in the sight of the weary soldiers around her and the imposing presence of the division commander. She tries to reassure Minjun, offering to step out of the training if his burden becomes too great. Minjun, with his characteristic bluntness, jokes that Yuno is lighter than steel, a material renowned for its density. His comment, meant to be a light-hearted compliment, catches Yuno off guard. Her reaction is one of mortification, as she blushes and looks even more uncomfortable. Minjun, oblivious to her distress, continues to focus on the training, while Yuno's embarrassment highlights the awkwardness of their situation. Minjun, undeterred by Yuno's protests, continues guessing her weight with a mix of amusement and curiosity. Yuno, her face flushed red with embarrassment, pleads with him to stop, worried that his incessant guessing might cause her further discomfort. Despite her pleas, Minjun's playful persistence remains a source of both humor and frustration. The other soldiers, thoroughly exhausted, pay little attention to the banter, focusing instead on catching their breath. However, Yuno's embarrassment is palpable, and she desperately tries to stop Minjun from making any more comments. Her frustration is evident as she starts smacking him gently to make him cease, adding a comedic touch to the scene. Meanwhile, the division commander, Brutus, and Kim Minji observe the interaction with keen interest. Their exchanged glances and subtle smiles hint at a shared amusement at the situation. To them, it's not just a playful exchange but a potential sign of something more, perhaps the beginnings of a connection or even a budding romance. As the moon casts eerie shadows in the dungeon, our soldiers are more drained than a phone on 1% battery. The platoon commander leads bravely from the front, while the corporals behind him are fantasizing about a spa day, their spirits as low as their energy levels. Just when they think they might finally get a break, their hopes are dashed by an unexpected twist, a flock of flying monsters swooping in from the sky. The bald corporal, ever the bearer of bad news, shouts a warning to the commander. Without missing a beat, the commander orders the troops into battle formation, their movements more akin to a synchronized dance than a strategic maneuver. Enter the Black Rakes. Imagine a snake and a sparrow had an identity crisis and went full nightmarish. With sharp teeth and glowing eyes, these airborne fiends are about as welcoming as a surprise bill. The Black Rakes circle above, their presence turning the soldiers' panic into a full-blown circus act. The general, observing from a safe distance, looks on with a mix of sympathy and mild amusement. He knows these little terrors, despite their size, are about to turn the night into a chaotic battleground. Even the general, with his less than stellar night vision, is having a hard time keeping track of them. Kim Minjun, stationed at the back and currently doubling as a makeshift first aid station, is frustrated beyond belief. Watching his fellow soldiers fumble is like watching a reality show with too many plot twists. He's irritated that they're not handling the situation better and contemplates jumping in. But with point deductions looming like a dark cloud and a nagging concern about breaking protocol, he hesitates. In a fit of defiance and determination that could rival any superhero, Minjun decides he's had enough of standing by. Fueled by frustration over potential point losses and the general's commentary, he grabs Yuno, who's as out of sorts as a cat in water, and rushes forward. Amidst the chaos, a single tear from Yuno's eye serves as a dramatic backdrop to Minjun's plea to the commander. Despite the commander's protests about the impracticality of engaging in battle while carrying an injured soldier, Minjun's resolve wins out. Reluctantly, the commander gives him one shot to turn the tide of this dark and twisted night.